Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Beyond the Stage conversation. And if you're here, you can stay on stage or grab a pillow. Please have a seat. I am the director of tonight's show, Diane Paulus, and I'm very happy to have Jill Johnson here.
Good evening. Hi.
Who is our movement director on the show. And Jill and I created this together with Eve up at the American Repertory Theater at Harvard 2 years ago. And we're so happy to be back, bringing it to New York, bringing it to this wonderful theater here, Manhattan Theater Club. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about the show, ask Jill some questions, and then we'll open it up for questions from you. So Jill, if you haven't had a chance to look in your programs, is the head of the dance program at Harvard. She also danced for years with William Forsythe and has been charged with recreating many of his ballets. So I know her as this incredible performer and teacher and now collaborator. But I wonder if you could speak a little bit about what was different and special about working with Eve and creating this. And I know you saw the show tonight, so anything you want to reverberate on from tonight's performance?
Well, thank you, and thank you all for coming so much. I think what has been so special about this process is just Eve. I mean, Eve is a force and an incredible woman. She really is. So just already to be invited by Diane to collaborate and to collaborate with Eve was just sort of an epic invitation that I feel daily humbled and privileged to be a part of. So I saw my job really to facilitate Eve's greatness. You know, Eve is in her body and has had this experience of what you saw on the stage tonight. That's her experience. So as a dancer, to be able to interact with Eve on that level, which is very much a nonverbal way, that people that are inside their bodies and have had such experiences are able to communicate in that way. So it was a very organic process with everyone, and I think all of the motion in it came from Eve, and we just helped to scale that to the stage. But really, I also, especially this time, felt like I had a charge to take care of Eve's body while she was going through this. So I charged myself with just being with her every step of the way. So if there was a spare moment in rehearsal while they were doing something with lighting or anything we were working on, I would go and just put hands on Eve. And, we would talk about little things, when you're having that moment in Bukavu where she has that sort of image as she's being wheeled in on the gurney. To say what this image, feel like your hands are your lungs, and we talk about little images like that, but really all of the motion in it stems from her experience. And so it was just a question of really being there to facilitate that.
So this theme of being in your body and this play in the body of the world, I'm wondering, what did that mean to you? I mean, what does it mean to be in your body for you, Jill Johnson?
It's a big question. I think so many things. I mean, I think what comes through in Eve's book is a reverence for the body, and that she received the message of her own body and then connected, wow, if I have that experience in my body, how can I be separate from the empathy and compassion for other people on the planet, especially those that have had trauma, but also the planet. And so it makes me think a lot about what we think about a lot at the Dance Center at Harvard, but I think as an artist and as a person in my body, about so many of the civic issues of our day is around body and our collective body. And so there's a disintegration. We're sort of over-medicated and overstimulated, and it's a kind of loud culture at the moment, and sort of the vulnerability and the care to slow down, to listen to your body, to listen to other people and other people's stories, and the empathy and the compassion that Eve is and personifies, I think a lot about. So it stirred that up for me about the ways in which I can positively contribute to that in the work that I do and the way I interact with other people, and just, what gets me out of bed the other day, I was asked that question, and I said to move people to be moved. Like the choreographer Pina Bausch said, I'm not interested in movement, I'm interested in what moves people. And I think if we can share stories like this. And what I was struck by tonight was what an empathetic audience all of you were. I think the most empathetic I've experienced thus far, and we've seen a lot of shows. And so that collective experience together helps us. And to be able to experience that empathy together softens, I think, some of the calcification and we're all stressed and, kind of tight, and a way to kind of break that open and say, actually, all of these things touch us in some way. And is there a way, Dr. Cornel West talks a lot about catastrophic consciousness, that, sexual harassment is not a problem, it's a catastrophe. So what do we do with that? If we really face it for what it is, are we able to turn it around like Eve does every day and inspires everyone around her to do? Can't we meet that challenge, that catastrophe head on, and be better for it and leave a legacy for it, that kind of thing. So there's a lot to think about, but those are some things on my mind.
I when you were talking, I love that part in the play. I remember being in rehearsal because the memoir, if you know the book, is much longer than what you saw tonight. Actually, one of the first things I did with Eve, which is now become lore, I went to her loft, which is the inspiration for the set in the most, the first part of the play. I mean, that's really it looks like that the temple and is exact replica of one in her house. She has that one chair is like that, and it really came about because I went to her loft and we read the book. She kept reading the memoir out loud to me. That's how we started. And the first time she read the whole thing in one sitting, and it took about 5 hours. Just one bathroom break, long, big, tall glass of water. And then we started this big process of how do we find the arc of this. And I didn't know. The one thing I knew is I didn't think it could be 5 hours. We had to cut it down. So it was always this question of what do we take out? What can we do through movement? What can be expressed through a gesture or a video? And I remember talking about that section, which is one of my favorite sections. And she was like, do we really have to have that? I'm like, you have to have it. It's when her sister says, you're going to learn how to be a patient. And she says, patient? I don't want to be a fucking patient. Because patient is sick, and sick is not moving forward. And then I loved, in the book, it has that repetition. It says patient, patient, patient. And I remember when I read that, I thought, I never thought about that. You're a patient, you're a sick person. But the idea that we call a patient, in a medical way, patient. Like this thing you're saying, how do we slow down? And that moment, that was sort of a key for me. That the end of that part one where she just says that word and she enters her first moment of slow down. There's several in the play where she goes to, in a way, sleep, where other things can happen, where the time slows down and she's able to just be in contact with herself. Because I think the thing I found so extraordinary about Eve is here's a woman who has spent her whole life advocating for women who have suffered violence and trauma. I mean, really traveling the world, putting herself in operations and fistula treatments and just not afraid of anything, not afraid of bearing witness, listening, being in the trenches. And yet, she hadn't looked at her own body. I mean, that to me was the departure point of the show, is that how could she be so connected and yet not to her own body? So that was for me kind of a way in this idea of in the body. Should we open it up? Questions, comments that either for myself or for Jill about what you saw? Yes.
Well, first, thank you. I thought it was a beautiful production. But since we have a movement specialist, I guess I'm curious about the moment where you invite the audience to stand up and also be part of the event.
Yeah, so the question was about the moment where we asked the audience to have a little Hare Krishna party with us.
Well, I think that idea came from Eve. I think we just said, well, why don't we get the audience up? It seemed like a good point in the play also to get people moving and to really personify what Eve is getting at. And it is like Eve to want everyone, come on, everyone, this feels really great. Trust me, it'll really help you through this moment. And sure enough, I mean, without fail, an audience, because I think at first we thought, well, are people going to know? Are they going to want to? And there was a bit of a test in the beginning. But I think it's also this idea that we permeate this fourth wall, that we're together with Eve in her living room, telling this story as she takes us through it. And also so that it's not in a place where the body is still abstract for the audience, that we have a moment, no matter how abled, to be able to have that moment. And then you sit down and often we'll hear, like tonight, the audience, she'll say, it feels good, right? And everyone says, yes, And it just took that moment. It didn't take very much prompting for everyone to rise in some capacity.
I think also, just to add on to that, this idea that we're doing a show about being in your body, and just to have a moment where the audience feels their blood rushing a little, To me, it was a little bit like, why don't we do that? At baseball games, we do it. Right. There's the 7th inning stretch. You've been sitting for an hour, stand up, get the blood moving, And I think there have been so many interesting studies. I remember I have 2 daughters, and my younger daughter was in kindergarten, and it was like, I feel like it was Eve, that fateful day when we got called in, and like the teachers were like, she doesn't know how to sit still. She's moving too much, and we think she should see a specialist. And I remember, and it's a very good school. I love the school she's in, but I remember thinking, I turned to my husband, I was like, really? I think she's just like got energy, And I think very soon after that, there were all these articles in the paper that now we learn that actually to learn, being like sitting still is not necessarily the best way to receive information. And we've made progress there, right? I think up at ART now, everybody has a standing desk. You go on walks for meetings because your body is engaged. So I think that was our attempt at saying, I mean, I'm a big one for freedom in the theater. So if you don't want to stand, you don't have to. I always tell Eve, don't make the people feel bad if they don't stand up. Right. Just tell them they can move their arms, because I think she wants everybody to dance. I'm like, some people may not want to get up, but put your arms up. Just have a moment of being in your body.
And that it doesn't take much to do that. And I think it touches on what Eve's talking about being a steward for our own bodies and trusting that. And if also we're not in the care of those health care providers, the physicians that aren't looking at us and really listening to our own experience, to listen to the body, it can be a really vulnerable, it can be really scary. We tend to doubt ourselves because in the front of medical professionals, we wouldn't know more than them, but actually we're the experts in our own experience. So to really trust that nonverbal cue, there's not much practice in the culture on that front. There's a lot of talking about it, a lot of rushing people through, and being in the body is a sacred thing, and it takes time.
And by the way, she also, I don't know if you know Eve's work, she has a thing that she's done for years, 20 years, V-Day, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary next February 14th. Yeah, extraordinary. And that has, in recent years, I think the last 5 or 6 years, turned into 1 billion rising. If you're interested in any of this, you can just Google it and learn about it. But the movement behind 1 billion rising is 1 billion people rising against violence against women and girls, and it's about dance. So dance is very important to Eve, because it is this. It's the experience. You can't take that away. It's another form of a revolution to dance for her across the world. So, yeah, she added that line in recently. She says, we have to dance in these times we're living in. I see she slipped that in. Another question or thought? Yes.
Between the 3 of you, can you talk a little bit about the rehearsal process? And were you guys collaborative the whole time? Did you 2 vibe off of Eve and follow her lead? Was there a moment where you were a leader and you were a leader? Or was it just hey, let's try this. Okay, I see what you're doing.
So the question is about the rehearsal process, if you can't hear, just about how did we collaborate, who had the ideas, how did we, lead the moment, and it was very organic, as I have to say. We would just start. We had the idea for the set, and literally we were in Eve's loft, and she would memorize a section and do it, and we'd sit on pillows like these in her living room on a rug like this in her house. And it was just sort of it was taking that experience and then just gradually physicalizing it more and more. And we had that chaise. And then it was kind of deciding what did we need to do to evoke different locations, because the show does travel to places. And this is the thing, when you're with Eve, even though it's a one-woman show, so we're in the room and there's Jill and me and a couple other people, stage managers and the team, the extended team. But it's small because it's just a one-person show. The thing about it is you feel like the world is in the room with you. It never feels like this is just a one-person show, kind of solipsistic one-person show. No, you're constantly talking. You're constantly you rehearse a little, and then we start having a debate about politics or about what's going on, or did you see today? It's like it blurs constantly, the work and then dialogue and a dialectic about what's going on. And so the world is in the room. So it was, questions of through video or movement. I think both Jill and I were interested in pushing her as a performer. Because if you've seen her perform before, she jokes, she's like, I thought I was going to sit on a stool, with some index cards, like vagina monologue. I was like, oh no. This just the memoir and the narrative required, but it was very organic. It was like, should we have a hospital gown? It would go like this. Should we how about a hospital gown? Yeah, that would be interesting if you changed. Should I take my clothes? Yeah, take your clothes. It's about the body. Let's go there right away. We're looking into my body. And she's like, okay, we try it. It was like that. It was very give and take. She would have ideas. We'd have an idea. Then we'd always look at Jill and say, how can she do that and be comfortable? Like on the chair. Like, right. Okay, we're recreating Sloane Ketter, and I want her to go back on the chair because she can't go on the floor because no one will be able to see her. Jill, go over there. How can she do that without 8 times a week? We don't want her to have spasms from putting herself in a awkward position. So then it was like working out the technical and back and forth.
And sort of refining, we'd have a conversation, and then that conversation, as Diane's saying, the sort of blurred of this time, we had a memory of it, but it would call up something else. And then we would go back to the scene and refine and say, oh, I think the timing is better if we actually do that motion on that line, or let's try this. So it was very iterative. And then just eventually what would sit right with Eve would work,
Yes, here. The garden, yes. Well, I had this feeling, again, I just felt, I don't know about you, but I have a very strong feeling in my head when I'm told, it's a one-person show. I kind of go, oh my God, a one-person show. I mean, I love them, but it's not quite, I go to the theater for a ritual and a bigger thing. That's the kind of theater I tend to choose to go to. And I did feel like, as much as I wanted people in the loft, I felt like the whole metaphors were not just in the loft. We're connected to nature and the planet. And so I had this idea. I was just looking at Eve one day. I said, I have an idea. At the end, there's the wall lifts and the whole earth is there, and we can have this big coup de théâtre, and there's this thing. And then I also felt it's a funny show, but it's a heavy show, right? It takes you to dark places, deep places, and I really respect what you're asking an audience to go through. And I just felt, same thing, rush, a show ends, and it's get your programs, exit to the right, leave. And I always find that so violent. As an artist, we've worked so hard to create this moment on the stage. And actually, the precious, important moment is what happens afterwards. Not just the 5 minutes, frankly, but the hours, the days, the years, right? It's what is left in the audience. So I just thought it would be great if we could just have a moment for the audience. To just, maybe even it's just 5 minutes before you pick up your coat and have to check your phone and leave the theater, that you could just take a little walk. Go in a corner and maybe find a little fountain and look at it for a minute. Just to have a moment to reflect. And at ART, we did these conversations after every performance. It was just something we decided as a theater we wanted to do. So it became like an extension. So, and it was wonderful to be able to do it in the garden. I know only you were sitting here, but often people sit and they're in the pillows, and it's kind of a rethinking of what, the typical post-show talkback is. And I do want to say, for those of you who stayed, there's a remarkable series that Manhattan Theatre Club is doing. So if you go on the website, you can see it. And you can come back, even if you didn't buy a ticket that night, to hear the talkbacks. And coming up, you heard Eve talk about Mama C, who is the director of City Joy. So she's coming from the Congo. So she will be here on February 13th, and then the 15th and the 16th. And she will be in conversation like we are. So it's an extraordinary opportunity to hear her talk about City of Joy and any questions you might have about the work there and how the women are doing. The doctors from the Mayo are coming. They came to Harvard as well. And lots of Sue, that amazing therapist who gives her that image of the chemo. Sue is coming. That's Sue's real voice, by the way, but Sue is coming to talk. So there's a really great series if you want to take advantage of it or tell your friends to look out for it.
A group of nurses are also coming to the show, too.
Yes. I don't know if you saw any buttons. Did you see the Cindy buttons? That Eve started that. She's like, I'm starting a Cindy movement. So she made these buttons that say Cindy, and they're just kind of left around the set. So,
That was a big moment for the audience. That got a round of
the
applause,
Cindy.
which was really moving.
We love the
hear.
Cindy section. She's a Cindy!
Go
Yay,
the Cindy's
Cindy!
in the world, yes.
Yay to the Cindy's of the world. Thank you for your work. Yes.
I was wondering, with the garden, from the beginning, did you conceive of that reveal where the curtains continue to open and it just goes on and on and on? It's such a wonderful moment, especially as the smell of the plants washes out of the house.
Yeah, I felt we're going to compress the space. We're going to be in this teeny little loft, and we're going to think, oh my God, the whole show is going to be here. And then it's like, poof, and it opens. So at ART, we have a much higher stage. So actually, it was like big and vast, and it was like actually you could see up to like the mountains of the Congo. Here, I knew it's a very low ceiling, but they had this width. I was asking Manhattan Theatre Club, I was like, can I open the portal totally wide? Let's go all the way wide, which is what we did.
It seems so beautiful because I hear when people talk about coming into their body, they often talk about that as an opening. So that seemed like such a perfect sort of metaphoric closure to the show.
Yeah, and I do want to say something about this. You will take one more question. These are all real plants. And what was so amazing at ART, and I've seen it happen here at Manhattan Theatre Club, this has become a garden, like a real garden. We have a horticulturist that comes. I read the reports. The horticulturist writes like how the plants are doing and what needs to be more watered and not. And the crew takes care of the plants. And when you leave in a few minutes, all the humidifiers come out, lights go on, and it does something. We're not just making a play here. When you take care of something alive and real, it just shifts you. And the crew goes around and they say, look what's budding. It's amazing to look at the new things that are growing, that have come since we've been here, because we've been here about 2.5 weeks, to see the new ferns that are opening. They're like babies. We go around, we're like, oh my God, look, that's opening there and that's opening there.
And this stems from Eve. I mean, this is important to her, and that's important to all of us. I mean, it's connected. It's opened us up to that. It's just
funny things like being tapped on the shoulder before show and say, there's a moth and it's in the projection screen. So when you see a blurb flying around in the projections, it's actually a moth. So, it's not a problem with the projector. We can't disturb the moth right now, but we'll get it after the show. A last question? Yes, back there.
I'm curious about, it is a one-woman show, but there are so many characters in it. I do think it's interesting that you put Sue's voice in, and that's the only voice that you hear, and I'm just curious. I mean, obviously what she said is so impactful and huge, but there was a conscious decision, obviously.
Yeah, originally we're thinking, could there be other actors? Could there be there's all sorts of people that could be like an ensemble around her. But there was just something about her narrating and having this experience with the audience and then her ability to really focus on those family members. It's really like you really sense her sister, you sense her son, you sense her mother. And at one point we had, early on, we had the doctor's voice who said, we could radiate your vagina. I had a doctor at Harvard record that for me. And we played it, and we were like, it's not right. I don't know. There was just something about Sue. Like, the goddess Sue was the one who came in to give that one voiceover. But you're exactly right. It's the only kind of intervention from the outside. But I feel like she does a remarkable job at creating these other people on stage. And she talks very poignantly about her mother. She really talks very deeply about the kind of ritual experience of theater, because she goes through that. I mean, she does this every day, and she really goes through this thing with her mother every night. And sometimes I watch her, I'm like, she's just talking to a pillow. I mean, it's just a pillow there, but there's something like them. And she'll always say, my mother was there. I saw my mother. So there's something about that experience of theater as ritual enactment, of a ritual catharsis that to me is really embodied in those moments when she puts the other people in space around her.
Even the way, closing, that literal closure of the cabinet, but also, but taking those moments, it's again that passage of analog time, not the rushed app time from our phones, but to be in the body takes time, and taking the time to process those things that are held in our bodies.
So on that note, I don't mean to rush you out. Take your time, but thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.